Our journey into Plato's world begins with a quiet question. Like the gentle breath of an evening breeze that softly touches the leaves of the trees, or the murmur of ancient waters embracing the shore, what then is the source of all that surrounds us? This is not just an ordinary question, it is a fundamental inquiry that has, since time immemorial, prompted humanity to ponder the profound essence of being. Let us try to close our eyes and allow ourselves to feel this first barely perceptible impulse toward understanding, this hushed yet persistent whisper that calls to us, inviting us to look deeper than the eye can see, to reach further than the hand can touch. Imagine a boundless starry sky on a moonless night. Each star seems to burn with its own fire. Each constellation holds its own unique shape. Yet, is there something that unifies this vast expanse? Something that stands behind this endless diversity? Is there an invisible force that holds it all together, bestowing order and harmony upon the cosmic dance of worlds? Or consider the countless flowers in a field. Every petal, every shade of color is unique, and yet they are all flowers. What is it that makes them flowers? Where does their shared essence lie concealed? This is the search for a foundation, a first cause, for that unchanging core hidden behind the shifting surface of existence, like a pearl in the ocean's depths that can only be found by immersing oneself in the silence. Plato, the great thinker of antiquity, felt this whisper, this need for a knowledge that transcends the bounds of ordinary, everyday perception. He did not merely look at the world, he gazed deeply into it, trying to discern the invisible threads that weave everything together, as if in a vast and intricate tapestry. He sat beneath that same starry sky, watching the constellations that year after year, generation after generation, retain their form, even as the stars within them are in constant motion, merging and parting in an eternal dance. Is there something unchanging within this ever shifting flow? This question gave him no rest, just as it did for so many sages before and after him. He watched as people were born and then passed away, as flowers bloomed only to wither, as the seasons turned, and as rivers carried their waters onward, never to return to their source. Everything, it seemed, was temporary, fleeting, subject to the inevitable erosion of time. Every object, every living being, every event, they appear, and just as inevitably, they vanish, dissolving into nothingness. Yet at the same time, Plato sensed that behind this transience there must be something steadfast, something fundamental, something that gives meaning and order to this seemingly chaotic existence, something that remains unchanged within the swirl of change, like an invisible axis upon which the entire world rests. The search for an essence, for a foundation, for that which remains constant in the maelstrom of change, became one of the most vital quests of ancient Greek philosophy, and Plato, delving into the depths of his contemplation, offered a wondrous answer to it: the existence of the ideas. He invites us on a journey where every step is an immersion into a world of eternal truths, where every thought is a touch upon the very source of all things. It is like stepping into a boundless garden, where every fragrance, every hue of a flower, every whisper of the wind among the trees speaks of a hidden harmony, of the unseen yet true forms that underlie everything beautiful and real. We sense that beyond the surface of this fleeting world, there exists something deeper, something fundamental, that lends meaning and order to this seemingly chaotic existence. This is not a mere notion or a fantasy, it is a profound, intuitive feeling that somewhere a perfection exists, a perfection for which we long and which we can recognize even within our imperfect world. This whisper of first questions is an invitation to release our hold on everyday perceptions and allow our minds to ascend to higher realms, where true being, the source of all that exists, is revealed. Let us imagine how these great thinkers, much like Plato himself, would contemplate the essence of things. They did not simply look at the world, they gazed deeply into it, seeking to discern the invisible threads that bind everything together, as if within a vast, intricate, and yet flawless tapestry, where every single knot and every single thread has its own place and its own purpose. They sat beneath the starry sky, watching the constellations that year after year, generation after generation, retain their form, even as the stars within them are in constant motion, merging and parting in an eternal dance. Each turn of the celestial sphere, each star that appeared above the horizon, testified to some hidden law. Is there something unchanging within this ever shifting flow? This question gave them no rest, like a soft yet insistent rain tapping at the window of thought. They watched as people were born and then passed away, as flowers bloomed only to wither, as the seasons turned, and as rivers carried their waters onward, never to return to their source. Everything, it seemed, was temporary, fleeting, subject to the inevitable erosion of time. Every object, every living being, every event, they appear, and just as inevitably, they vanish, dissolving into nothingness, like sand slipping through one's fingers. But at the same time, Plato and other thinkers sensed that behind this transience, there must be something steadfast, something fundamental, something that gives meaning and order to this seemingly chaotic existence, something that remains unchanged within the swirl of change, like an invisible axis upon which the entire world rests. Imagine you are listening to music. The individual notes sound and then they fade, but the melody, the harmony, it remains, its essence does not vanish with the final sound. It exists beyond any particular performance, like an ideal model toward which every musician strives. This is not a mere notion or a fantasy. It is a profound, intuitive feeling that somewhere a perfection exists, a perfection for which we long and which we can recognize even within our imperfect world. Plato believed that behind everything we see, hear, or touch, something else exists, an unchanging, perfect model. One could picture it as an ideal standard that exists beyond time and space, like a primordial imprint in an eternal material. Imagine a master sculptor creating a work of art. Before ever taking up the chisel, the sculptor holds a clear image in their mind of the future creation, its ideal form. This image is the perfect model toward which the artist strives, embodying it in stone or wood. In a similar way, Plato believed that for all things in our world, such perfect invisible models exist. These models do not decay, they do not age, they do not change. They are the primary foundation, the ideal pattern from which all the specific things that surround us arise. They are like templates according to which all of existence is created, and every object in our world is but a more or less successful copy of such an unchanging model. This is like the impression of a seal upon wax. The impression itself might be blurred or imperfect, but the seal always retains its own clear, distinct form. For example, we see a multitude of trees, tall and short, young and old, with broad crowns and with slender branches. Every tree is unique, with its own characteristics. But does tree itself exist as an ideal form that makes every tree a tree, regardless of its species or age? Plato answers, yes, it does. And this is the very first clue to understanding the idea. The idea of a tree is not a specific oak but the essence of treeness itself, its universal and perfect archetype. It contains within it everything that makes a tree, its fundamental characteristics that exist beyond any particular physical tree. It is not merely the shape we see with our eyes, but something far deeper. It is the very substance, the very core of the thing, its true being, which is not subject to decay and change. It is like an archetype that exists in a collective memory, but for Plato, it existed objectively in a world of ideas. This is not just a general concept, it is the true being that gives meaning to all individual trees. Thus, for Plato, an idea is not just a thought in someone's head, not an abstract notion that can arise and then disappear. It is an objective, eternal, unchanging model, the primary foundation of all things in our world. Imagine a drawing of a perfect circle. This drawing, though on paper, is only a reflection of the perfect geometric circle that exists as an idea. No circle we draw will ever be absolutely perfect, for there will always be some flaws, some irregularities, but the idea of the circle itself exists perfectly, flawlessly, as a mathematical prototype that is independent of any material medium. In a similar way, Plato believed that for everything, a table, a flower, a person, justice, such a perfect idea exists. It is unchanging, unborn, and indestructible. It does not come into being and does not pass away. It simply is always and everywhere. This is the fundamental essence that defines the nature of a thing, its true substance. Everything we see in the world is merely a reflection, a shadow of these perfect ideas, their imperfect copies, which are but echoes of true being. One can imagine an idea as the quiet presence of perfection that never changes, that always remains itself regardless of what is happening around it, like a boundless space that contains all changes within it but itself remains unchanged. Try to imagine the silence of the deep ocean, where a storm may rage upon the surface, but in the depths an absolute calm reigns, undisturbed by any motion. In the same way, the ideas exist in their own world, immune to the turbulent changes of our everyday existence. They are like motionless lighthouses in the boundless ocean of being, showing the way. They are the source of permanence, of stability, of that perfection toward which everything in the world strives, like a magnet that draws unto itself all that yearns for completion. Each idea contains within itself the entire fullness of its being. It is the ideal toward which all the phenomena we see around us aspire. This is not a static perfection, but a living primary essence that gives birth to everything. It is the deep inner peace we feel when we contemplate something eternal and unchanging, something that transcends this fleeting existence. This search for essence is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a yearning to grasp the very heart of reality, to uncover its hidden mechanics. Having completed our search for essence, we arrive at a core understanding. Plato believed that behind everything we see, hear, or touch, something else exists, an unchanging, perfect model. This model is not subject to change or time. It exists in its own eternal and unmoving sphere. One can picture it as an ideal standard that exists beyond time and space, like a primordial imprint in an eternal material that never fades and is never erased. Imagine again the master sculptor creating a work of art. Before ever taking up the chisel, the sculptor holds a clear image in their mind of the future creation, its ideal form. This image is not merely a fantasy or a fleeting notion. It is the very thing toward which the artist strives, embodying it in stone or wood. This image is an internal prototype, a perfect exemplar that guides the entire process of creation. In a similar way, Plato considered that for all things in our world, such perfect invisible models exist. These models are not destroyed, they do not age, they do not change, they cannot be damaged or annihilated. They are the primary foundation, the ideal pattern from which all the specific things that surround us arise, like reflections in a mirror. They are like eternal templates according to which all of existence is fashioned, and every object in our world is but a more or less successful copy of such an unchanging model. This is like the impression of a seal upon wax. The impression itself might be blurred, distorted, or temporary, but the seal itself always retains its clear, perfect form, regardless of the number of impressions it has made. It is these unchanging models that Plato named the ideas. It is crucial to understand that for Plato, an idea is not simply a thought or a concept that exists only in our minds. No, it is an objective reality that exists independently of human perception. It is, in fact, more real than material things, for material things are transient. They change and disappear, whereas the idea is eternal and immutable. Imagine mathematical concepts, for example, the number 2. The number 2 is not two specific apples or two specific stones. It is an abstract yet absolutely real entity that exists whether anyone is thinking about it or not. The idea of the number 2 always remains itself. It cannot be broken or grow old. In a similar way, the idea of beauty exists independently of whether there are beautiful flowers or paintings in the world. It is the source of their beauty, but it does not depend on them. Therefore, for Plato, an idea is not just a thought in someone's head, not an abstract notion that can arise and then disappear. It is an objective. It is an objective, eternal, unchanging model, the primary foundation of all things in our world. Consider again the drawing of a perfect circle, as we have mentioned. This drawing, though on paper, is only a reflection of the perfect geometric circle that exists as an idea. No circle we draw will ever be absolutely perfect, for there will always be some flaws, some irregularities, some unevenness. But the idea of the circle itself exists perfectly, flawlessly, as a mathematical prototype that is independent of any material medium. It is unborn and indestructible. It does not come into being and does not pass away. It simply is always and everywhere, like an infinite, inexhaustible current of pure essence. This is the fundamental substance that defines the nature of a thing, its true essence, its very being. Everything we see in the world is merely a reflection, a shadow of these perfect ideas, their imperfect copies, which are but echoes of true being. One can imagine an idea as the quiet presence of perfection that never changes, that always remains itself regardless of what is happening around it, like a boundless, transparent space that contains all changes within it, but itself remains unchanged. Try to imagine the silence of the deep ocean, where a storm may rage upon the surface, but in the depths, an absolute tranquility reigns, undisturbed by any motion or agitation. In the same way, the ideas exist in their own world, immune to the turbulent changes of our everyday existence. They are like motionless beacons in the boundless ocean of being, showing the way and serving as a guide for all that exists. They are the source of permanence, of stability, of that perfection toward which everything in the world strives, like a magnet that draws unto itself all that yearns for perfection, for completion. Each idea contains within itself the entire fullness of its being. It is not a part of something larger, but is a self-sufficient, absolute form. It is the ideal toward which all the phenomena we see around us aspire. For example, the idea of justice is absolute and perfect justice, which does not depend on how just the actions of specific people or laws may be. It is the very model toward which any just society strives. This is not a static perfection, but a living primary essence that gives birth to everything. It is the deep inner peace we feel when we contemplate something eternal and unchanging, something that transcends this fleeting existence. Plato believed that our material world, the world we perceive with our senses, is but a pale copy, a shadow of the true, eternal world of ideas. All things in our world are constantly changing, appearing and disappearing. They are imperfect and unstable. The ideas, by contrast, exist in their perfection. They are eternal, unchanging, and self sufficient. They are the archetypes, the primordial forms that give meaning and structure to everything. This concept of the unchanging model is the foundation of Platonic philosophy, opening a path to understanding his views on knowledge, the soul, and the ideal state. It allows us to understand why Plato favored intellectual cognition over sensory perception, for only reason is capable of comprehending these eternal and perfect ideas. Having awakened to the concept of the unchanging model, we can now delve deeper to understand why Plato asserted that there is something more than form, something that transcends our ordinary perception. Imagine the multitude of trees that grow all around us, tall and short, young and old, slender and sprawling, with broad crowns and with delicate branches. We see oaks, birches, pines, and willows. Each tree is unique, with its own distinct features, its own unrepeatable pattern of bark, its own shape of leaf. Yet, despite all their diversity, we understand without fault that each one is in fact a tree. Why is this so? Where lies this common property that allows us to unite all these different shapes under a single concept? Plato asserts tree itself exists as an ideal form that makes every tree a tree, regardless regards its species, its age, or its place of growth. This is the essential clue to understanding the idea. The idea of a tree is not the specific oak standing in your garden, nor the birch swaying in the wind outside your window. It is also not the sum of all trees that have ever existed or ever will exist. No, it is the very essence of treeness itself, its universal and perfect archetype. It contains within it everything that makes a tree, its capacity for growth, the presence of roots, a trunk, branches, and leaves, its function as a source of life and oxygen. These fundamental characteristics exist beyond any particular physical tree. This is not merely the shape we see with our eyes, the outline of an object, but something far more profound. It is the very substance, the very core of the thing, its true being, which is not subject to decay and change. It is like an archetype, a primordial pattern that exists independently of its physical embodiment, just as the idea of a house exists before the first stone is ever laid. In our world, the world of sensations and perceptions, we encounter only an infinite number of reflections of this idea. Each physical tree is but an imperfect copy, a shadowy echo of the perfect idea of the tree. It can be afflicted by disease, damaged by a storm. Eventually, it will wither and crumble to dust, but the idea of the tree remains eternal, unchanging, and unblemished. It is not subject to time, decay, or change. It exists in its own world, the world of ideas, where our minds, freed from the limitations of sensory experience, are able to enter. Let us try another example. Think of a circle We can draw countless circles, large and small, in the sand, on paper, on a computer screen. None of these physical circles will ever be absolutely perfect. There will always be some flaws, some irregularities, some imperfections, perhaps invisible to the naked eye, but existing from a mathematical point of view. But does the idea of a circle exist? Yes, Plato answers. It is the pure geometric form, the ideal circle whose points are all perfectly equidistant from its center. It is not a physical object, but a perfect abstract model. The idea of the circle exists flawlessly, immaculate as a mathematical archetype that is independent of any material medium. It is toward this very idea that every circle we draw aspires, attempting to become the most accurate copy it can possibly be. Thus, for Plato, when we speak of something more than form, we are not merely referring to the external appearance or the contours of an object. We are speaking of its inner essence, its ideal nature, its primal pattern. These ideas are not simply abstract concepts invented by the human mind. They are objective, real entities that exist in their own dimension. They are the source of the very reason why things are the way they are. Consider justice. We see many just acts in the world, but also many unjust ones. What makes an act just? Where lies this universal quality that allows us to recognize justice in different situations? According to Plato, there exists an idea of justice, a perfect, absolute, eternal justice that is independent of specific laws, traditions, or human opinions. It is the ideal toward which all just actions, laws, and societies strive. Every just act is merely a reflection, a copy of this magnificent idea. This concept of something more than form is profoundly important for Plato because it explains why we can know the world and why there is order within it. If everything were merely fluid and changeable, if there were no unchanging models, we could not possess stable knowledge about anything. The ideas are that stable foundation, that motionless point that allows us to navigate the world and to strive for perfection. They are the invisible axis upon which all of reality rests, ensuring its harmony and its unity. They are the bridge between the chaos of the sensory world and the order of rational knowledge. Thanks to these ideas, we are able to understand universal concepts, such as beauty, good, and truth. When we say that something is beautiful, we are unconsciously comparing it to the universal idea of beauty, which exists independently of our personal tastes. It is like an inner compass that points us toward the ideal. Therefore, for Plato, the search for something more than form leads us to the discovery of an entire world of eternal, perfect essences that constitute true being and are the source of everything we see in our own world. This is not merely a line of reasoning, it is an invitation to a deep awareness of the hidden harmony of the universe, a harmony that reveals itself only to those who are willing to peer beyond the veil of the visible. Having felt the whisper of first questions, having unveiled the search for essence, having realized that there is something more than familiar form, we now arrive at a fundamental affirmation. For Plato, an idea is not merely a thought in someone's head, not an abstract notion that can arise and then disappear. It is something far deeper and more real. It is an objective, eternal, unchanging model, the primary foundation of all things in our world. Imagine an architect who plans to erect a magnificent cathedral. Before the first stone is laid, before the slightest physical element of the building appears, a perfect image of the cathedral arises in the architect's mind and then upon the blueprints. This is not just a drawing, it is the complete design, which includes all the details, proportions, aesthetics, and functionality. This design is the idea of its perfect model. The physical cathedral that will later be built will be the embodiment of this idea, its material manifestation. It may suffer from time, fire, or human hands, but the idea of the cathedral itself, its primordial image, remains unchanged in the architect's mind and later in cultural memory. It is the same for Plato. For everything in the world, there exists such a perfect eternal idea that serves as its prototype. Let us take, for example, justice. When we speak of a just act, a just law, or a just person, we are aspiring toward a certain ideal. We understand that justice is not something we have invented or something that changes from person to person. It has its own objective nature. Plato would say that there exists the idea of justice, a perfect, absolute, eternal justice. It is not a specific judge's decision or a particular law. It is the very essence of justice, that which makes something just. It does not depend on our opinions or desires. It simply is. The idea of just is the pure model toward which any attempt to embody it in our world strives. Every just act is but an imperfect reflection of this perfect idea, like an echo in the mountains. Thus, for Plato, an idea is not just a general concept that arises in our minds as a generalization of many similar objects. No, it is a real essence that exists independently of our knowing it. It is the source of the existence of all things in our world. Imagine a source of light. The light itself is the source, and its rays, reaching us, make the surrounding objects visible. In a similar way, the ideas are the source of being, and material things are merely their reflections, drawing their very existence from these ideas. For instance, if we see many beautiful objects, a flower, a sunset, a work of art, what makes them all beautiful? It is not simply our subjective feelings, it is because they, in some way, partake of the idea of beauty. The idea of beauty is not a specific flower, but the perfect essence of beauty itself. It is eternal and unchanging. The flower will wilt, the sunset will fade, the painting may be destroyed, but the idea of beauty remains. It is the universal model that allows us to recognize beauty in its diverse manifestations. Plato believed that these ideas exist in their, which he called the world of ideas. This is not a physical place one can travel to. It is a metaphysical reality that exists beyond space and time. In this world of ideas, absolute perfection, eternity, and immutability reign. Each idea there is a pure, perfect essence, untarnished by any of the flaws or changes inherent in our material world. This world of ideas is the source of truth, goodness, and beauty. Therefore, an idea is not just a thought in someone's head, not an abstract notion that can arise and then disappear. It is an objective, eternal, unchanging model, the primary foundation of all things in our world. Consider again the drawing of a perfect circle, as we have mentioned. This drawing, though on paper, is only a reflection of the perfect geometric circle that exists as an idea. No circle we draw will ever be absolutely perfect, for there will always be some flaws, some irregularities, some unevenness. But the idea of the circle itself exists perfectly, flawlessly, as a mathematical prototype that is independent of any material medium. It is unborn and indestructible. It does not come into being and does not pass away. It's simply always and everywhere, like an infinite, inexhaustible current of pure essence. This is the fundamental substance that defines the nature of a thing, its true essence, its very being. Everything we see in the world is merely a reflection, a shadow of these perfect ideas, their imperfect copies, which are but echoes of true being. When we contemplate a concept such as human, we are not referring to a specific person, with their unique features, age, and experience. We are speaking of the idea of the human, of the universal essence that makes every individual a human being. This is the perfect model of humanity, the ideal toward which our own soul aspires. Our body may age, fall ill, and change, but the idea of the human remains unchanging and perfect. This concept of the idea as a model has profound consequences. It means that truth, beauty, and goodness are not relative or subjective concepts. They have an object, eternal source. It also means that knowledge consists not so much in accumulating information about the sensory world, but in the recollection, anamnesis of those ideas that our soul saw before its birth. Our soul, while dwelling in the world of idea, contemplated these perfect models, and therefore when we encounter their reflections in this world, we recognize them, we remember them. Plato compared this to how a craftsman creates an object while looking at a model. The craftsman, when making a table, looks at the perfect model of a table that exists in his mind. In the same way, the creator of the universe, or the demiurge, as Plato calls him in some dialogues, fashioned our material world by looking upon the eternal ideas as perfect models. He did not create them, they already existed. He merely shaped matter in accordance with these eternal archetypes. Thus, the ideas are not only objective models but also the causes of the existence of things. They are what gives things their essence, their character, and their purpose. Without the ideas, the world would be a formless chaos, a disorderly mixture devoid of meaning and order. The ideas are the ordering principle that gives the universe its harmony and structure. They are the eternal forms that ensure the stability and knowability of being. This conception of the idea as a model is one of Plato's most important contributions to world philosophy, one that continues to inspire contemplation to this day. Now that we have grasped the understanding of the idea as an eternal and perfect model, we can feel its essence even more deeply. One can imagine an idea as the quiet presence of perfection, something that never changes, that always remains itself, regardless of what is happening all around it. It is like a boundless, transparent space that contains all changes within it, yet itself remains unchanged, like the mirrored surface of a lake that reflects a turbulent sky but in its own depths preserves its calm. Try to imagine the silence of the deep ocean. On the surface, storms may rage, immense waves may rise and fall, crashing against the rocks with a roar and spray. But in the ocean's depths, an absolute tranquility reigns, undisturbed by any motion or agitation. There, in that silent profundity, an unshakable stability exists. In the same way, the ideas exist in their own world, in the world of ideas, immune to the turbulent changes of our everyday existence, which is but the surface of this great ocean of being. They are like motionless lighthouses in the boundless ocean of being that always, regardless of fog or storm, show the way and serve as an unchanging guide for all that exists. They are the source of permanence, of stability, of that perfection toward which everything in the world strives, like a magnet that draws into itself all that yearns for perfection, for completion, for its own true nature. Each idea contains within it the entire fullness of its being. It is not a part of something larger, but is a self-sufficient, absolute form. It requires nothing from outside itself for its existence, for it is primary and complete. It is the ideal toward which all the phenomena we see around us aspire. For example, the idea of courage is not merely someone's isolated display of bravery in battle, but the perfect essence of courage itself, existing in its purest form. It does not depend on how courageous a particular person may be at any given moment. It is the very model toward which any manifestation of true courage strives. It is like a spring of pure water that nourishes all the streams and rivers. This is not a static perfection frozen in time, but a living primary essence that gives birth to everything. It is the source of the life force that manifests in all things. Each idea is like an inner fire that burns eternally and gives light to our understanding. It is the deep internal peace we feel when we contemplate something eternal and unchanging, something that transcends this fleeting existence. It is the feeling of harmony that comes when we understand that behind all the diversity of the world stands a single, ordering principle. The ideas are not mere abstractions, they are the very essences of things. When we see a beautiful flower, we do not just see petals and color. Our soul, according to Plato, recognizes in it a reflection of the idea of beauty. This idea is not just an aesthetic concept, it is perfection itself, existing objectively. The beauty of the flower is temporary, it will wither, but the idea of beauty is eternal. This eternal presence of perfection is embodied in temporary manifestations, giving them meaning and value. They are the invisible light that illuminates our world and allows us to see its true nature. In this tranquility of the eternal ideas, an immeasurable wisdom is concealed. They are the repository of true knowledge, to which we can ascend only with the help of reason. The sensory world, the world we perceive with our senses, is but a shifting current, shadows on a cave wall, as Plato would later describe it. It is constantly changing, and therefore it cannot be the source of stable, true knowledge. Only the ideas, with their unchanging presence of perfection, can be the object of true knowing. This understanding of the ideas as a quiet presence of perfection also explains our inner yearning for excellence, beauty, justice, and truth. Why are we always searching for something better, something more perfect? According to Plato, it is because our soul, before its birth, resided in the world of ideas and contemplated these perfect models. This memory of perfection lives within us and compels us to search for truth and harmony in this world. We strive for perfection because deep inside we feel its quiet presence, its invisible influence. This concept bestows a sense of peace and order. If there are unchanging ideas, then the world is not a chaotic collection of accidents. It possesses a profound meaning, a structure, and a purpose. The ideas are the ordering principle that gives the universe its harmony and its structure. They are the eternal forms that ensure the stability and knowability of being. This quiet presence of perfection is the cornerstone of Platonic metaphysics, allowing us to peer beyond the visible and to feel the deep order of existence. Through this understanding, we can find peace in knowing, certain that beyond all transience and change, there exists an eternal, unchanging, and perfect foundation. This perfection manifests most brilliantly in one of the aspects of being most tangible to us in beauty. Let us think about beauty. We see beautiful things, a delicate flower opening its petals to the sun, a shimmering, starry sky scattered with billions of diamonds, the gentle, sincere smile of a child, harmonious music that touches the most secret strings of the soul. Each of these is beautiful in its own way, possessing its own uniqueness, its own unrepeatable shade of enchantment. But is there somewhere an absolute beauty that is the source of all other beauty? It's an inexhaustible archetype. Does something exist that makes all these diverse manifestations a unified whole in our perception of the beautiful? Plato answered this question affirmatively. Yes, the idea of beauty exists. It is not just a beautiful object, not a specific painting or sculpture, but the very essence of beauty itself, its pure, undistorted form, which exists beyond any particular manifestation. Imagine an infinite shining crystal that radiates pure light. Each facet of this crystal is a separate manifestation of beauty in the world, but the crystal itself, its very core, that is the idea of beauty. It is eternal, unchanging, perfect, and self sufficient. When we see something beautiful in our world, we are only touching upon an echo of this absolute beauty, its pale reflection, as if looking at the shadow of a beautiful object without seeing the object itself. The beauty of the physical world is merely a reflection, a refraction, or as Plato would say, a participation in this higher idea. Our soul, according to Plato, remembers this idea of beauty. It contemplated it before its birth in the world of ideas, where eternal harmony reigns. And so, when we encounter manifestations of beauty in this world, we recognize it, we feel an attraction to it, unconsciously striving for its perfect archetype. It is like the memory of a long lost yet deeply cherished melody that we suddenly hear again in a chance sound. This idea is the force that draws us to everything harmonious and perfect, that awakens in us a feeling of sublimity and wonder. It is not merely a category of aesthetics, it is a fundamental aspect of being that permeates the entire universe. The physical beauty that surrounds us is temporary. The flower will wither, the starry sky will shift, the smile will vanish, the music will fall silent. But the idea of beauty remains. It is not subject to the flow of time. It cannot be destroyed or tarnished. It is the constant source from which all the beauty of the material world draws its existence. This is precisely why we feel that true beauty is not just external appearance, but something deeper, something that pertains to the essence of things. Truth, according to Plato, and beauty are inextricably linked. To know the idea of beauty is to know the truth of its essence. Imagine a master potter creating a jar. Every jar he makes has its own uniqueness, yet they all aspire to a certain ideal form of a jar that exists in his consciousness. This ideal form is the idea of the jar, its perfect archetype, and although any individual jar can be broken, the idea of the jar remains unchanged, ready to be embodied in an infinite number of new jars. So it is with beauty. Every manifestation of beauty is merely an attempt by the material world to approach the perfection of the idea of beauty. The Platonic understanding of beauty is not merely abstract. It has a profound ethical and cognitive meaning. The striving for beauty, according to Plato, leads the soul to strive for goodness and truth, as all these ideas are interconnected and ultimately ascend to a single summit, the idea of the good, which is the source of all other ideas. When the soul contemplates the beautiful, it feels a longing for its true home, the world of ideas, and seeks to return to it. This striving is called eros, a sacred love that elevates the soul from sensory beauty to the contemplation of absolute beauty and other eternal ideas. Thus, the idea of beauty is not only an aesthetic principle, but also a powerful guide for the soul on its path to knowledge. It is the invisible thread that connects our earthly world with the celestial world of ideas. It is the source of inspiration that compels artists to create, philosophers to seek truth, and every person to strive for something better, something more perfect. This presence of absolute beauty is an integral part of the architecture which gives meaning to our searches and aspirations. It teaches us to see not just the surface of things, but their deep, perfect essence, which is an echo of eternal beauty. Having glimpsed the archetype of beauty, it is time to descend from the high abstractions to more familiar things, so that we may understand more deeply how the eternal ideas permeate our everyday world. To better grasp this profound truth, let us imagine an object that is part of nearly every person's life, a chair. In the world, there exists a countless number of chairs. Try to imagine their diversity: wooden, metal, soft, hard, with high backs and without them, large and small, of different colors and shapes. There are antique, carved chairs that hold the stories of many generations, and there are modern, minimalist ones that fit harmoniously into the world of high tech spaces. Each of them serves the purpose of sitting, yet each is unique with its own features, its own unrepeatable design. However, despite all their external variety, we always understand without fault that this is in fact a chair. What is it that gives them this shared essence? Plato explains, this happens because the idea of the chair exists. It is the very essence of a chair, that which makes every chair a chair, its idea universal form. The idea of the chair has no specific color or size. It is not made of wood or metal. It is pure function, pure design, that which allows an object to fulfill its role as a support for sitting. It is not a specific object that can be seen or touched, but an abstract perfect model. Imagine an invisible shining standard that exists in the realm of eternal and unchanging being. It is this very idea that determines what is a chair and what is not. This idea is the unchanging model after which all other chairs that exist in our sensory world are created. Every craftsman who makes a chair unconsciously strives reproduce this very ideal form, this essence that exists beyond his specific creation. He may use different materials, different techniques, but the ultimate goal is always the same: to create an object that will best correspond to this perfect idea, chair. Think of an architect creating the plan for a house. The plan itself is the idea of the house. It exists before the first stone is laid. The physical house can be built from different materials. It may have flaws or be partially destroyed, but the plan, the idea, remains unchanged. Thus, the idea of the chair is the first cause for the existence of all chairs in our world. It is their essence, their very definition. Without this idea, the concept of a chair would be meaningless, and we would not be able to distinguish chairs from other objects. This idea exists regardless of whether there is even a single physical chair in the world. Even if all the chairs on Earth were to be destroyed, the idea of the chair would still exist in its perfect and unchanging world. This is what distinguishes Platonic ideas from simple human concepts or generalizations. The concept of a chair in our mind can change, evolving over time, but the idea of the chair, according to Plato, is absolute and immutable. It is not a product of human thought, but an objective reality that the human mind can discover, but not create. For Plato, all things in our material world are but imperfect reflections of these eternal ideas. Our chairs, which we see and use every day, can break, burn, age, and rot. They are temporary, changeable, and subject to decay. They are, according to Plato, like the shadows on the wall of a cave, which are merely reflections of the real objects that lie outside the cave. These physical chairs are only copies, drawing their substance and their being from the perfect idea of the chair. When we sit on a chair, we are unconsciously interacting with a reflection of the idea. Every time we create or even simply think of a chair, we are in essence referring to this universal, eternal model. It is not just an object of wood or plastic, but the embodiment of an ancient, perfect form. The idea of the chair is what gives a chair its identity, its chairness, regardless of its specific physical characteristics. This concept has a profound meaning for understanding the entire universe of Plato. If a perfect idea exists, even for an object as simple as a chair, then all the more so for more complex and important concepts, such as a human being, justice, goodness, or beauty. They all have their own eternal perfect ideas, which are their true essence and the source of their existence. Plato believed that through understanding these ideas, we can attain true knowledge, which transcends the changing sensory world. It is like learning a language. You can memorize many words, but true understanding comes when you grasp the grammar, the structure, the essence of the language. As a system, the ideas are the grammar of the universe. They are the invisible order that underlies all of reality, the silent source from which all things draw their being. This profound essence is eternal, perfect, and accessible to our minds if only we learn to see it beyond the external forms. We continue our quiet journey into the world of Plato, immersing ourselves in his profound thoughts that unveil for us the hidden dimensions of being. After considering the chair in its essence, we can now move to an even more fundamental understanding. Our chairs, which we see and use every day, are merely imperfect copies of the perfect idea of the chair. This is not just a poetic metaphor, but a key element of the Platonic worldview that explains the very nature of reality. Imagine the glint of the moon on the surface of the water. It is beautiful, it shines, but it is only a reflection, not the moon itself. The moon remains there in the sky, majestic and unchanging, while its reflection on the water can be distorted by waves, scattered by ripples, or vanish from the surface entirely. In a similar way, all the material things that surround us, every chair, every flower, every person, are but glimmers, reflections, shadows of the true being that exists in the world of ideas. Our physical chairs, which we perceive with our senses, are temporary, changeable, and subject to decay. A wooden chair can break, a metal one can rust, soft one can wear out. It can be consumed by fire, crumble to dust from age, be damaged, or be completely destroyed. All these changes testify to its imperfection, its dependence on external circumstances, its finite existence. It is not self-sufficient. Its being is transient. But the idea of the chair remains eternal, unchanging, and unblemished. It is not subject to time or change. It cannot be destroyed, for it is not material. It exists in its own world, the world of ideas, where our minds, freed from the limitations of sensory experience, are able to enter. In this world there is no decay, no aging, no disintegration. There, absolute perfection and eternity reign. Plato used one of his most famous allegories, the allegory of the cave, to explain this difference between the world of shadows, our sensory world, and the world of true being, the world of ideas. Imagine people who have lived since childhood in a cave, chained in such a way that they can only look at the wall in front of them. Behind them, a fire burns, and between the fire and the prisoners, various objects are carried whose shadows are cast upon the wall. The prisoners see only these shadows and believe them to be the one and only reality. They do not know that real objects exist behind them, much less do they know of the sun that illuminates everything outside the cave. It is the same with us, according to Plato. We live in a world that is like this cave. Our senses perceive only shadows, the fleeting, imperfect reflections of the true ideas. We see a beautiful flower, but it is only a shadow of the idea of beauty. We see a just act, but it is only a shadow of the idea of justice. We perceive these shadows as reality, and often do not realize that behind them a higher, more perfect reality exists. The world of ideas, this understanding of being more than a shadow, crucial. It means that true knowledge cannot be obtained through sensory experience alone, since everything we perceive with our senses is merely a copy that is constantly changing. Knowledge based on it will be just as changeable and unstable. To attain true, stable knowledge, we must rise above the world of sensory things, peer behind the curtain of shadow, and comprehend the ideas themselves. This is precisely why Plato placed such great importance on reason and philosophy. Reason is our instrument that allows us to leave the cave, to free ourselves from the illusions of the sensory world and to see the true light of the ideas. Philosophy is the path to this liberation. It is the training of the soul that helps it to turn away from the shadows and toward true being. When we say that something is real, we often mean its material existence. But for Plato, true reality belongs to the ideas. They are more real than physical objects because they are eternal, unchanging, perfect, and self sufficient. They are the primary foundation, the source of being, whereas material things are merely their consequences, their derivatives. It is like an author who creates a story. The characters and events themselves may be fictional, but the idea of the story, its moral, its message, that is the true unchanging essence. Thus, everything we perceive with our senses is but a pale reflection, an echo of the true being that resides in the world of ideas. We live in a world of shadows, and the true source of light is the ideas, which exist beyond the limits of our immediate sensory perception. The idea of the chair is the truly existing chair, while each individual chair we see is but its imperfect material shadow. This concept of being more than a shadow is an invitation to deep reflection on the nature of reality, to a search for a truth that transcends the fleetingness of the visible world, to the realization that true being is hidden behind the veil of sensory perception, accessible only to pure reason. We continue our calming journey through the philosophical landscapes of Plato. After realizing that everything surrounding us is more than a shadow of true being, we approach another fundamental aspect of his teaching. Plato saw that the world is full of diversity, yet at the same time he sought to find the unity behind this diversity. This idea is key to understanding how he envisioned the universe as a harmonious and not simply as a chaotic collection of accidents. Imagine a boundless forest. Millions of trees grow within it. Oaks, maples, birches, pines. Each tree is unique, with its own history, its own shape, its own age. They differ in the color of their leaves, the texture of their bark, the span of their branches. Alongside them are countless other plants, animals, and insects. All of this seems disparate, individual, filled with infinite differences. However, despite this immense variety, we intuitively understand that they are all part of one great ecosystem, the forest. What is it that unites them all into a single whole? Where lies this unity within the multiplicity? Plato asserted that it was the ideas themselves that constituted this unity. They are like invisible threads that permeate everything and bind the disparate elements into a single whole, giving them a common essence. Just as all the diverse words in a sentence are united by a single intention, a single thought, so too are the myriad material things in our world connected to their corresponding ideas in the world of ideas. Let us take an example. We see many just acts. One person helps a neighbor, another abides by the law, a third conducts business honestly. Each act may be different in its form, circumstances, or outcome, yet they all share a common quality, justice. What makes them all just? Where is this universal quality that allows us to recognize justice in its various manifestations? Plato explains, it is the idea of justice, which is one and the same for all these acts. It is not the sum of all just acts. On the contrary, every just act is a reflection of this single perfect idea. It is like a single unchanging compass that points the way for all just deeds. It is like a single melody composed of many notes. Each note is unique with its own pitch, duration, and timbre, but only together do they create a harmonious melody that has its own unified essence. If you change one note, the melody may change, but its underlying theme, its idea, remains constant. In the same way, the ideas unite the multiplicity of the sensory world, giving it meaning and order, making it knowable and understandable. They are the universal principles that stand behind each individual phenomenon, bestowing upon that phenomenon its very being. Imagine a vast orchestra performing a symphony. It contains many different instruments, violins, flutes, trumpets, percussion. Each instrument plays its own part, and these parts may seem separate and dissimilar, but they are all subordinated to a single score, a single design of the composer, a single idea of the symphony. Without this unifying idea, the orchestra would be just a chaotic collection of sounds. It is the idea of the symphony that gives unity to this diversity of sounds and makes them harmonious. In the same way, the world of ideas gives unity to the entire diversity of the material world. This concept of unity and diversity has profound significance for Plato because it explains how we can know the world and form general concepts. If every single thing were absolutely unique and had nothing in common with other, knowledge would be fragmented and impossible. But thanks to the ideas, we can generalize, classify, and understand interconnections between. We can see what is common in the dissimilar, find order in the chaos. Plato believed that by ascending from the contemplation of the multiplicity of sensory things to the comprehension of the unity of the ideas, we approach true knowledge. It is a path from chaos to order, from misunderstanding to clarity. When we see many beautiful objects, beautiful flowers, beautiful painting, beautiful people, we might think that beauty is merely a subjective perception. But Plato asserts that all these different manifestations of beauty are reflections of the one absolute idea of beauty. This idea is the unity that brings together all the diversity of the beautiful in the world. The ideas are like invisible threads that permeate everything and bind the disparate elements into a single whole. They are the universal principles that stand behind each individual phenomenon, bestowing upon that phenomenon its very being. They are the invisible order that underlies all of reality, the silent source from which all things draw their being. This profound essence is eternal, perfect, and accessible to our minds, if only we learn to see it beyond the external forms. This understanding of unity and diversity brings a feeling of harmony and peace, for we see the world not as a random collection of phenomena, but as an ordered, interconnected system that has its own deep internal logic, its own unchanging primary source. In this unity that embraces all the diversity of being, true wisdom lies hidden. After we have grasped the concept of unity and diversity, approaching the understanding of how the ideas connect all of existence, we arrive at the next, no less important step, the realization that the ideas cannot be seen with the eyes or touched with the hands, for they have no material form. They do not exist in space like physical objects, nor are they subject to time like transient phenomena. They exist in their own world, which we can only comprehend with our minds. Imagine the wind. You cannot see it. It has no color or shape. You cannot grasp it with your hands. It has no material substance, but you feel its influence. You see how it sways the trees. You hear its whisper in the leaves. You feel its coolness on your skin. Its presence is undeniable, even though it is invisible. So it is with the ideas. Although they are invisible to our physical senses and inaccessible to direct perception, their presence and their influence on our world are palpable. They are the foundation, the unseen bedrock upon which all of reality is, like the roots of a great tree that nourish it and give it life while remaining hidden beneath the earth. This invisibility of the ideas is a matter of principle. If the ideas were material, they would be subject to the same laws as material things, to change, to decay, to aging. But since the ideas are eternal and unchanging models, they must exist outside the material world, in a realm not governed by physical laws. Their existence is more real than the existence of material things, for they are eternal and immutable, whereas the material world is constantly changing and deteriorating. It is like a mathematical formula, it cannot be seen or touched, but it describes reality as absolutely true and is unchanging, regardless of whether it is applied to physical objects. The formula describing the law of universal gravitation exists independently of whether an apple is falling. Plato asserted that our sense organs, sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, can only perceive the world of phenomena, the world of material things. This world is a world of change, of fleeting forms, of imperfect copies. For example, we can see many beautiful things, but none of them is beauty itself. It is only a reflection, a pale echo of the idea of beauty. Our eyes can see colors and shapes, but they cannot see the essence of color or shape, just as the eyes can see the reflection of the sun on the water, but cannot look directly at the sun itself. To apprehend the idea, another kind of sight is required, the sight of the mind. This is not a physical act, but an act of intellectual contemplation. It is the ability of the mind to rise above sensory experience, to purify itself of illusions, and to directly perceive the pure, perfect essences. It is like the ability to grasp the rule that lies behind a sequence of numbers, rather than simply memorizing the numbers themselves. In his dialogues, Plato often shows how Socrates, his teacher, through a process of questions and answers, through so-called dialectic, helps his interlocutors to detach from specific examples and ascend to an understanding of universal concepts, that is, the ideas. This is a process that requires concentration, reflection, a departure from the mundane. It is not always easy, for we are accustomed to relying on our senses, but it is this very path that leads to true knowledge, to an understanding of what constitutes true reality. The ideas are invisible, but their existence is fundamental. They are the reason why things are the way they are. They are what gives the world its structure, order, and meaning. Without the ideas, the world would be a formless chaos, a disorderly mixture devoid of any logic or sense. Imagine a book in which all the words and letters are written, but there is no meaning, no story. In the same way, without the ideas, our world would be but an accumulation of facts without any internal connection. This concept of an invisible yet real world of ideas offers us a deep sense of peace. It tells us that behind all the transience and uncertainty of our material world there exists an eternal, unchanging, and perfect reality. It is like a quiet harbor in a stormy sea. When we feel lost or doubt the truth, we can turn to this inner understanding, to our mind's ability to apprehend these invisible but true essences. They are the unchanging guideposts that allow us to find meaning in existence and to strive for higher forms of perfection. The knowing of these invisible ideas is the highest goal of philosophy. They are the very source of all that is true, good, and beautiful in the universe. The logical continuation of this understanding is the question, If the ideas cannot be seen with the eyes or touched with the hands, then how can we possibly know them? Plato gives a clear answer. It is reason that is our eye of the soul, which allows us to peer behind the curtain of the changing world and see the eternal ideas. Imagine you are standing before a vast painting. Your eyes can see the colors, the brushstrokes, the shapes. But to understand the true meaning of the painting, its idea, its message, you need not only sight, but also reason. Reason allows you to interpret what you see, to connect the individual elements into a unified whole, to grasp the artist's profound intention. In a similar way, our senses, sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, can only perceive the world of phenomena, the world of material things. This world is a world of change, of fleeting forms, of imperfect copies, as we have mentioned, the shadows of true being. It is constantly changing, flowing, and therefore cannot be the source of stable true knowledge. For example, you can see many specific beautiful objects, a flower, a sculpture, a sunset. Your eyes perceive their beauty, but this beauty is temporary and relative. The flower will wither, the sculpture may be damaged, the sunset will pass. If our knowledge of beauty is based only on these sensory impressions, it will be unstable and limited. But reason, freed from the constraints of sensory perception, is able to ascend to the level of pure thought and apprehend the idea of beauty itself, the eternal, unchanging, absolute essence of beauty. Plato compared this to a person emerging from a dark cave into the bright sun. At first, the eyes react painfully to the light, but gradually they adjust and begin to see the real world, not just the shadows on the walls. Our senses are like eyes that are accustomed to the dimness of the cave. They comfortably perceive the shadows of the material world, but reason is what allows us to turn toward the light of truth, toward the pure radiance of the ideas. This transition is not always easy. It requires effort, discipline, and a willingness to cast aside habitual ways of thinking. To achieve this knowing, the soul must be purified of passions, of the distractions of the sensory world, of immersion in material goods. This does not mean a complete rejection of the senses, but rather their subordination to reason. Reason must be the guide, like an experienced charioteer who directs the horses, the passions, and the will of the soul toward a higher goal. When the soul is purified and focused, it can begin to contemplate the ideas. It is like a clear, transparent spring of water that reflects the heavens with their stars, whereas a muddy river filled with silt only confuses, reflecting a distorted image. Philosophy, according to Plato, is that path, that training of the mind, which allows us to gradually ascend from the perception of shadows to the contemplation of the ideas themselves. This is not a passive contemplation, but an active process of thought, analysis, and dialogue. In his dialogues, Plato often shows how Socrates, his teacher, through a process of questions and answers through so-called dialectic, helps his interlocutors to detach from specific examples and ascend to an understanding of universal concepts, the ideas. This is a process that requires concentration, reflection, a departure from the mundane, from habitual, superficial notions. Each question, like a ray of light, penetrates the darkness of ignorance, exposing the imperfection of sensory knowledge. This path of knowing is not always easy, for we are accustomed to relying on our senses, on what is visible and tangible. But it is this very path that leads to true knowledge, to an understanding of the first principles of being. Reason, according to Plato, is the only instrument capable of apprehending the eternal ideas, because reason itself is of a kindred nature to them. It is not merely a part of the material world, it is a part of the soul, which, like the ideas, is immortal and partakes of a higher reality. The more we develop our reason, the more we can see beyond the visible, the deeper we penetrate into the essence of things. It is like training a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it becomes. The more we exercise our minds in philosophical reflection, the clearer our vision of the ideas becomes. Thus, for Plato, reason is our guide into the world of truth. It is the compass that shows us the way to eternal knowledge, to those unchanging models that are the source of all that exists. The knowing of the ideas through reason is the highest purpose of human life, for it leads to wisdom, to the harmony of the soul, and to an understanding of our place in the universe. It is a path to the inner peace that is born from the awareness of the deep order of being. After we have realized that reason is our eye of the soul, capable of apprehending the invisible yet real ideas, we proceed to the next, fundamental aspect. Everything in our world exists because it emulates its idea. The idea is its cause, its pattern. This is not a mere coincidence, but a profound interconnection that gives meaning and order to all that is. Imagine a composer. The melody he creates first exists as a pure idea in his mind. This idea is perfect, complete, even though it has not yet been played by any instrument or written on paper. When musicians perform this melody, they do so by following the notes, the rhythm, the harmony that are embedded in the composer's original idea. Each performance will be unique with its own nuances, but they will all exist thanks to that single original idea of the melody. This idea is the cause of their existence, their model, their source. Plato believed that it is exactly the same throughout the entire universe. Everything we see in the material world, be it a flower, a stone, or a person, exists not on its own, but because it is a reflection, a copy of, or as Plato often said, partakes in its perfect idea. The idea is not just a theoretical model, it is an active, life-giving force that bestows being upon material things. It is their cause in the deepest sense of the word. For example, when we see a beautiful person, their beauty is inextricably linked to the idea of beauty. The person is beautiful because their appearance, their inner world, their harmony in some way emulate or partake in the perfect idea of beauty. The idea of beauty itself is the unchanging source, the cause of this beauty. If the idea of beauty did not exist, then there would be no beautiful things in the world. It is like a source of light, which is the cause of objects becoming visible. Without the source of light, there would be no visibility. The ideas are the formal causes, or patterns, and the final causes, the purpose toward which things strive. In Platonic philosophy, everything strives to be the most perfect copy of its idea possible. A chair strives to correspond to the idea of the chair, to be functional and stable. A person strives to correspond to the idea of the human by developing their rational and moral qualities. This striving for perfection is an inner driving force embedded in the very nature of things through their participation in the ideas. Imagine an echo in the mountains. The echo is only a reflection of a sound, its pale, fading copy. But the sound itself, which gave birth to it, is the first cause, the source of this echo. It exists independently of whether there are mountains to reflect it. In the same way, material things are but echoes of the eternal ideas. They draw their existence, their form, their very essence from the ideas. This principle of the idea as cause means that the world is not a random collection of atoms or formless matter. It is ordered, structured, and has a profound meaning because everything has its idea that shapes it and gives it a purpose. It is like a craftsman who creates various tools: a hammer, a saw, a plane. Each tool has its unique form and function, existing thanks to the idea of a hammer, the idea of a saw, which were in the craftsman's mind. Each of these ideas is the cause for the creation of its corresponding tool. For Plato, this connection between the idea and the thing is not simple imitation. It is a metaphysical link that connects two worlds: the world of ideas, the world of true being, and the world of phenomena, the world of sensory things. Material things participate or partake in the idea, and it is this participation that gives them their being and their qualities. The more a thing emulates its idea, the more perfect it is. This also means that when we strive to understand the essence of something, we must look not to the material world but to the world of ideas. To understand what true courage is, we must turn to the idea of courage and not simply observe the brave acts of people, which can sometimes be imperfect. Reason, as we have already said, is the only instrument that allows us to make this transition from sensory to intellectual knowing. The idea as cause is not just a concept that explains the origin of things, it is also a concept that gives the world its teleological character. Everything, as it were, strives toward its idea, toward its own perfection. This creates a sense of harmony and purpose in the universe. Everything is directed toward its perfect form, its ideal prototype. This movement toward perfection, this influence of the ideas on the world of phenomena, is an eternal and unceasing process. Thus, the idea is not merely a passive model, it is an active creative force that shapes the material world, giving it structure, form, and essence. It is the invisible architect that creates all that exists, ensuring its existence and its place in the great cosmos. This profound truth, discovered by Plato, offers us a sense of peace and confidence that behind all visible transience there exist eternal, perfect causes that make the world meaningful and harmonious. After grasping the distinction between the world of ideas and the world of things, and understanding the idea as the cause of all that exists, we now approach the most important, culminating point of Plato's teaching: the idea of the good. For Plato, the idea of the good is not merely one among many ideas, it is the apex, the highest of all ideas, the source of being and knowledge for all other ideas, much like the sun that illuminates the entire world of ideas. Imagine how Plato described this in his famous analogy of the sun from the dialogue, The Republic. Just as in the visible world, the sun is the source of the light that allows us to see object and the source of the life that gives growth and existence to all living things, so too in the world of ideas. The idea of the good is the light that allows the mind to apprehend the other ideas and the source of life that grants them their very being. In the visible world, the sun is the source of light. We can see trees, flowers, mountains, and animals only thanks to the light of the sun. Without sunlight, everything would be plunged into impenetrable darkness, and we would distinguish nothing. Light bestows visibility. In the visible world, the sun is also the source of life. The sun does not just illuminate, it is also the cause of life, growth, and development. Plants perform photosynthesis thanks to solar energy, providing food for animals and humans. It sustains all the processes of life on Earth. Plato draws a parallel with these two functions of the sun, transposing them onto the idea of the good in the world of ideas. First, the idea of the good is the source of knowing for the world of ideas. Just as the sun illuminates visible objects, allowing us to see them. So too does the idea of the good illuminate the other ideas, making them knowable to the mind. When our reason attempts to grasp the idea of beauty, the idea of justice, or the idea of the circle, it does so thanks to the light that radiates from the idea of the good. Without this light, the mind could not apprehend the ideas. They would remain unknowable, like objects in darkness. To understand any idea is in essence to understand its connection to the good. Second, the idea of the good is the source of being for the world of ideas. But the idea of the good does not simply make the other ideas knowable, it is also the cause of their very being. Just as the sun bestows life-giving power and existence upon everything in the visible world, so too is the idea of the good, the source of the existence and essence of all other ideas. It is what gives the ideas their eternity, their immutability, and their perfection. Without the idea of the good, the other ideas would not exist. They would not have their eternal and perfect being. It is the first cause that grants the ideas their ontological weight. Therefore, the idea of the good is the absolute highest principle of which stands above all other ideas. It is the source of truth, beauty, order, harmony, and justice. This is not just a moral concept, but a metaphysical reality that permeates the entire cosmos. It is like a central core from which all rays of truth and being emanate. Why the good specifically? For Plato, the good is that which is perfect, that toward which all things strive. Everything, every action, every idea has its purpose, and this purpose is always directed towards some good. A flower strives for full bloom, a person for a virtuous life, a state for justice. All these aspirations point to a single, absolute good, which is their ultimate end. The idea of the good is what gives meaning and purpose to everything that exists. It is what makes everything worthy of existence. Plato also believed that apprehending the idea of the good is the highest goal of philosophical knowing. When the philosopher, having traveled the path of dialectic, ascends to the contemplation of the idea of the good, they reach the highest level of wisdom. This is not just an intellectual understanding, but a deep inner realization that transforms the soul. It is like the person who, having left the cave, finally sees the sun itself, feeling its warmth and its light. Apprehending the idea of the good allows the philosopher to understand all other ideas in their interconnectedness, to see their unity and harmony. This gives them the ability not only to know the truth but also to act in accordance with it, applying this knowledge in practical life in governing the state, educating citizens, and building a just society. The idea of the good is the light that allows one to distinguish truth from falsehood, good from evil. This concept of the idea of the good as the sun of the world of ideas is the cornerstone of Platonic philosophy. It underscores the hierarchy of the ideas where the good is the apex, and it gives meaning to the entire process of knowing. It shows that the universe is not meaningless, but has a deep ordered character that is permeated by a striving for perfection. For Plato, knowing the good is not only the path to truth, but also the path to true happiness and the harmony of the soul. It is the realization that behind all the manifestations of being, there exists a single, the absolute source that gives meaning and value to everything. It is an invitation to an eternal search that leads to inner enlightenment. After we have beheld the idea of the good as the sun that illuminates the entire world of ideas and is the source of being and knowledge, the question naturally arises: how do we, people who live in a world of shadows, attain this highest knowledge? How do we bridge the gap between sensory perception and the intellectual contemplation of the ideas? Plato offers us a path of knowing, which is a gradual ascent from the world of changing phenomena to the world of eternal truths, from the darkness of ignorance to the bright light of wisdom. Imagine a person who has spent their entire life in a dark cave, as in Plato's famous allegory. They see only the shadows on the wall, which they believe to be the one and only reality. These shadows are their sensory experience, their knowledge of the world. When such a person is forcibly dragged out of the cave into the sunlight, they at first feel pain and confusion. Their eyes are not accustomed to the bright light, and they long to return to the familiar darkness. But if they can endure this discomfort and gradually grow accustomed to the light, they will begin to see the true objects and eventually the sun itself, the source of all light. This process of adjusting to the light is a metaphor for the path of knowing, according to Plato. The first stage of this path is the knowing of the world of sensory things, or as Plato called it, the world of doxa, opinion. At this level, we rely on our sense organs, we perceive individual objects, we see a particular chair, we hear a certain melody, we feel the beauty of a specific flower. This knowledge is changeable and unreliable, as the objects themselves change, and our perception of them can also be deceptive. It is divided into two sublevels. First is imagination akasia. This is the lowest level of knowing, where we are dealing with shadows, reflections, and illusions. For example, when we see the glint of objects in water, or in a mirror, or when we perceive mere hearsay. This knowledge is the least certain. Next is belief, pistis. This is our knowledge of the sensory objects themselves, which we perceive directly. We believe in their existence, but our knowledge of them is still based on shifting impressions and is not final. We know that a chair is before us, but we do not understand its true essence. This world of opinion is the world in which most people live. They are content with superficial impressions, not seeking to look beyond the visible. But the philosopher does not stop here. The second stage is the transition to rational knowing, or the world of episteme, true knowledge. This stage is also divided into two sublevels that lead us to the apprehension of the ideas. The first of these is thought, dianoia. At this level, the mind begins to detach itself from specific sensory images and to work with mathematical and geometric objects. For example, when we study geometry, we draw circles, but we are thinking about the ideal circle, which does not exist in the material world. This knowledge is more certain than sensory knowledge because mathematical objects are unchanging. However, it still requires certain assumptions, axioms, and does not ascend to the contemplation of the highest principles. This is like the person who, having grown accustomed to the light outside the cave, begins to see the true objects, but cannot yet look directly at the sun. The highest level is intellectual contemplation, noesis. This is the highest level of knowing accessible to a human, which allows for the direct apprehension of the ideas. This is not just thinking about the ideas, but their direct intuitive vision by the mind. At this stage, the soul, with the aid of dialectic, gradually ascends from less perfect ideas to more perfect ones, until it reaches the very summit. The idea of the good. Dialectic is the art of conducting a dialogue, of asking questions, of exposing contradictions, thereby clearing the mind of false notions and gradually approaching the truth. This is like the philosopher who, by discussing countless just acts, finally arrives at a pure understanding of the idea of justice itself. This is the highest act of the mind, which allows the soul to contemplate the ideas in their purity and interconnectedness, grasping their being and their origin from the idea of the good. This path of knowing is not passive. It requires the active efforts of the mind, constant learning, self-improvement, and moral purification. The philosopher who has walked this path becomes wise. They not only possess knowledge but also understand its source, see the interconnectedness of all things, and are able to live in accordance with the highest truths. For Plato, this path of knowing is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a profound spiritual and moral transformation. The closer a person comes to the world of ideas, the more virtuous they become, for the ideas are not only the source of truth, but also the source of goodness. Knowing the idea of the good leads to an understanding of what is the true good for a person and for society. Thus, the path of knowing in Plato is an ascent from the sense changing world to the world of intelligible, eternal ideas, with the idea of the good at its peak. It is a process that begins with doubt and wonder at the diversity and imperfection of the world and ends with the apprehension of absolute truth. It is like an ascent up a great mountain, where with every new height an ever wider and clearer vista opens before you. True knowledge is not just the accumulation of facts, but a deep inner understanding of the essence of things, of their connection to the eternal ideas. This path offers not only knowledge, but also a higher purpose for human life, opening up possibilities for harmony and self realization. After we have explored the path of knowing as a gradual ascent from shadows to light, from the sensory world to the world of ideas, another important question arises. How exactly can our minds apprehend these eternal and invisible ideas if they exist outside of our material world and cannot be perceived by the senses? Plato provides an answer to this question in his unique concept of recollection, or anamnesis. This is not simply the acquisition of new knowledge, but rather the recovery of what the soul already knew before. Imagine you are listening to a melody you heard in your distant childhood but had completely forgot. When you hear it again, you get the feeling that you are remembering it, even if you cannot pinpoint exactly where or when you heard it. It does not feel entirely new or unfamiliar to you. In a similar way, according to Plato, the knowing of the ideas occurs through the recollection of what our soul had already contemplated before its birth. Plato believed that our soul is immortal and existed before it was born into our body. Before its earthly incarnation, the soul resided in the world of ideas, where it directly contemplated all the perfect, eternal, and unchanging ideas. It saw the idea of beauty, the idea of justice, the idea of the good, the idea of the circle, and the idea of love in their pure, absolute forms. This was the period of its true, perfect knowledge. However, when the soul is embodied and born into our material world, it experiences a kind of shock or forgetting. The sensory world, with its changeability, imperfection, and illusions, obscures the soul's memories of the perfect ideas. It is like a bright light that, when we emerge from darkness, temporarily blinds us and we forget what we saw in the dark. The soul becomes immersed in the world of shadows and forgets the world of light. Nevertheless, this forgetting is not complete. Deep within the soul, vague memories remain, echoes of what it once saw. When we encounter material things in our world, for example, a beautiful flower, a just act, or a nearly perfect circle, these things, being imperfect copies of the ideas, act as hints or stimuli for the soul. They seem to awaken these faint memories, causing the soul to recollect the perfect ideas it had contemplated before. This process of recollection is the essence of knowing for Plato. It is not mere memorization of facts, but an inner realization, a recognition of the truth. When we say that we understand something, according to Plato, it means that our soul has recollected the corresponding idea. For example, when a child learns geometry and understands that the sum of the angles in a triangle is 80 degrees, They are not learning something entirely new. They are recollecting an eternal truth about the idea of the triangle, which their soul already knew. The role of dialectic and philosophical dialogue in this process is crucial. Through the posing of questions, the analysis of concepts, the exposure of contradictions, and the constant striving for clarity, the philosopher helps their interlocutor to cleanse the mind of sensory illusions and superficial opinions, thereby facilitating the process of recollection. It is like a midwife who helps the soul to give birth to the knowledge that is already there. Socrates, Plato's teacher, was a master of this meditative method. It is important to understand that anamnesis is not a passive process. It requires the active effort of the mind, concentration, and a turning away from sensory impressions. The more we practice philosophical reflection, the more vivid our memories of the ideas become. It is like training one's memory. The more you use it, the better it works. The concept of anamnesis also explains why we strive for perfection. Our soul, remembering the absolute perfection of the ideas, constantly feels a longing for it. This striving for truth, goodness, and beauty is innate, and it is an echo of our pre earthly memory of the world of ideas. Every manifestation of beauty, goodness, or justice in our world is but a reminder of that perfect world from which we came. Thus, knowing through recollection is not just an intellectual theory, but a profound understanding of the nature of the human soul and its connection to eternal reality. It is the realization that true knowledge is already within us, and the task of philosophy is to help us recover it. This grants a sense of deep peace and optimism, for it means that we are capable of apprehending the deepest truths of being, because our soul is a part of that eternal reality, a bearer of its wisdom. It is a path to inner enlightenment that leads to self knowledge and harmony with the cosmic order. After delving into the concept of anamnesis or recollection, which explains how the soul can apprehend the eternal ideas, the question logically arises: who is it that helps the soul on this path? Who is capable of leading it out of the cave of illusions and showing it the way to the world of ideas? According to Plato, this is the role of the philosopher, not merely a scholar or a sage, but a guide who helps others to recollect the truth and direct their minds toward the knowing of true being. Imagine the person who, having emerged from the dark cave and grown accustomed to the light of the sun, returns to help their companions who are still bound in chains and see only shadows. This person is the philosopher. Their task will be difficult. Their eyes, having adapted to the light, will see more poorly in the cave than the eyes of those who were born there. Their words may seem incomprehensible or even mad to those who have seen nothing but shadows, but their mission is to inspire others to seek the truth, to help them break free from the chains of ignorance. The primary function of the philosopher, according to Plato, is not to transmit ready-made knowledge, but to stimulate independent thought. They do not pour knowledge into the soul as if into an empty vessel. Rather, they help the soul to uncover the knowledge that is already contained with. This is similar to the work of a midwife, who helps a woman to give birth to a child without creating the child herself. Socrates, Plato's teacher, was a master of this maieutic method. He did not give direct answers, but asked questions that compelled his interlocutor to seek the truth for themselves, to expose their own false notions, and to get to the essence of things. This method of dialogue or dialectic is the philosopher's main instrument. Dialectic is not a mere argument. It is the art of conducting a meaningful dialogue where, through questions and answers, the analysis of concepts, the exposure of contradictions, and the elimination of false notions, the participants gradually ascend from the sensory to the universal, from specific examples to abstract ideas. It is a process of purifying the mind, freeing it from the rust of the everyday, turning it away from illusions and superficial judgment. Each question from the philosopher, like a ray of light, penetrates the darkness of ignorance, exposing the imperfection of sensory knowledge and prompting the search for deeper truths. The role of the philosopher extends beyond simple instruction. First, they assist in the purification of the soul. The philosopher helps the soul to cleanse itself of the passions, material distractions, and false beliefs that prevent it from seeing the ideas. This is not necessarily asceticism in the literal sense, but rather control over sensory desires and the prioritization of the spiritual over the material. Next, they direct the mind toward the world of ideas. They show the way to a higher reality, demonstrating the limitations of sensory knowing. They reveal that true beauty, truth, and goodness are not found in material things, but in the eternal ideas. It is as if they are pointing to the sky for one who was used to looking only at their feet. Then they help in the cultivation of moral virtues. Since the idea of the good is the highest, the knowing of the ideas is inextricably linked to the development of moral excellence. The philosopher, by their example and guidance, fosters the development of wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice in the soul. They strive to make people not only smarter, but better. Finally, they are suited for political leadership. In his Republic, Plato asserted that the ideal state must be governed by philosopher kings. Only they, by virtue of their apprehension of the idea of the good, are capable of governing society justly and wisely, ensuring the true well-being of all citizens. They see the truth, and therefore their decisions will be aimed at the common good, not at personal interests or fleeting desires. They are able to distinguish true good from illusion. This concept makes the philosopher not just an academic thinker, but an active participant in the life of society, its moral and intellectual guide. Their mission is not popularity or wealth, but the enlightenment of others, even if this leads to misunderstanding or conflict, as it did with Socrates. The philosopher is prepared to suffer for the truth. In the modern world, where fleeting impressions and superficial knowledge prevail, the role of the philosopher, according to Plato, is particularly relevant. They call us to deep reflection, to the search for meaning, to moving beyond external forms. They invite us not just to consume information, but to think critically, to ask fundamental questions, and to strive for a truth that transcends temporality. This is a calling to self-knowledge and self-improvement, to a life filled with meaning and wisdom. The philosopher is one who is not afraid to go against the current, pointing to the source even if most are content with the echo. After we have discussed the role of the philosopher as a guide to truth, a key question arises that lies at the heart of all Platonic metaphysics. How exactly can the human soul, which resides in the sensory world, interact with the eternal and unchanging idea? For Plato, the soul is the very bridge, the link that connects the world of matter with the world of pure being, the world of shadows with the world of light. Imagine a fine yet strong thread that connects two distant stars. These stars exist in different spaces, but this thread is what binds them, making them part of a single system. In the same way, the soul, according to Plato, is of a divine nature. It shares a kinship with the idea. It is not material. It is not subject to decay or death. It is immortal and existed before it was embodied. This is not merely a belief, but a fundamental conviction of Plato's that explains a person's capacity for knowledge. Before its birth, in a time not subject to earthly dimensions, the soul resided in the world of ideas. There, in that eternal and perfect reality, It directly contemplated the pure ideas, the idea of the good, the idea of beauty, the idea of justice, the idea of the circle, the idea of it saw them in their absolute purity, untarnished by any of the imperfections of the sensory world. This was its period of true, perfect knowledge, its golden age. Imagine it soaring in this boundless expanse of truths, saturating itself with their light and perfection, like a bird flying freely in a cloudless sky. It was a part of that world, absorbing its wisdom and harmony. However, when the soul is embodied and born into our material world, it experiences a kind of fall and forgetting. The body, with its passions, sensory impressions, and limitations, acts as a kind of prison for the soul. It obscures the soul's memories of the perfect ideas, like a thick fog descending upon a clear landscape. The soul becomes immersed in the world of shadows, the world of changing phenomena, and forgets the light of the ideas. It is as if it has entered a labyrinth where it is easy to get lost among the numerous but false paths. Yet, as we have already mentioned in the concept of anamnesis, this forgetting is not complete. Deep within the soul, faint memories remain, echoes of what it once saw. These memories are its innate predispositions, its intuitions, its yearnings for truth, beauty, and goodness. When we encounter material things in our world, for example, a nearly perfect circle, a just act, or a work of art, these things, being imperfect copies of the ideas, act as hints or stimuli for the soul. They seem to awaken these faint memories, causing the soul to recollect the perfect ideas it had contemplated before. It is like the light touch of an ancient object that suddenly resurrects long forgotten memories. This connection of the soul to the ideas explains why we strive for perfection, for truth, for beauty. Our soul, remembering the absolute perfection of the ideas, constantly feels a longing for it, like a thirsty person searching for a spring of water. This striving for truth, goodness, and beauty is innate, and it is an echo of our pre earthly memory of the world of ideas. Every manifestation of beauty, goodness, or justice in our world is but a reminder of that perfect world from which we came, of the home where the soul felt truly free. The role of philosophy in this process is crucial. It is the path that helps the soul to free itself from the bonds of the body and the sensory world, to purify itself of illusions, and to return to the contemplation of the ideas. This is not just an intellectual exercise, but a deep spiritual and moral purification. The more the soul is cleansed and turns to reason, the more vivid its memories of the ideas become. It is like a clean mirror that reflects objects without distortion, unlike a dirty one that only obscures the image. Plato believed that by apprehending the ideas, the soul not only acquires true knowledge, but also develops its higher faculties, becoming more virtuous and harmonious. This is a path to self knowledge and self improvement. The knowing of the ideas is not only the path to truth, but also the path to true happiness and the harmony of the soul. For when the soul returns to its true origin, to its kinship with the ideas, it finds its true peace and purpose. This connection of the soul to the ideas is eternal, and it is this that gives meaning to human existence, bestowing upon it a deep cosmic dimension. It is the realization that we are more than just bodies. We are souls that contain within us the echoes of eternal wisdom. After we have explored the soul's connection to the eternal ideas through anamnesis, the question logically arises: how does this intricate architecture of ideas affect the very world in which we live? For Plato, the world of ideas is not merely an abstract concept, But the fundamental foundation that gives the universe its order, its harmony, and its structure, without these eternal and perfect archetypes, the world would be but a formless chaos, devoid of meaning and any possibility of being known. Imagine a vast, complex mechanism, such as a clock with its countless gears and springs. Every detail within it performs its function, having its own precise shape and size. If the single perfect design of the watchmaker, which precedes its creation, did not exist, then all these parts would be just a random heap of metal, incapable of telling time. It is this unseen design, this idea of the clock, that is the source of its order, its harmony, and its functionality. It is the first cause that gives meaning to every single part. In a similar way, the world of ideas for Plato is that universal design, that divine matrix which brings order to the entire cosmos. Each idea, as we have already discussed, is a perfect model for its corresponding things in the material world. The idea of justice is the standard for all just laws and actions. The idea of beauty is the source of all aesthetics in the world. The idea of the triangle is the basis for all triangular shapes that we might draw. All of these ideas, residing in their own world, create a hierarchical, harmonious system that is crowned by the idea of the good, the highest and all-encompassing idea, which is the source of being and knowledge for all other ideas. It is like a vast, perfectly functioning library, where every book is an idea, and all of them are arranged in a perfect order that allows any piece of information to be found. This order and harmony of the world of ideas directly influences the world of things. Although material things are imperfect copies of the ideas, they still reflect their structure and order. It is like the impression of a seal on wax. The impression itself may be distorted, but it still carries the essential features of the seal. Thanks to their participation in the ideas, material things are not absolutely chaotic. They have a certain form, function, and properties. Everything, no matter how imperfect it may be, strives toward its idea, toward its own perfection. This striving for form, for orderliness, is the inner driving force of all that exists. For example, the human body, though it is changeable and mortal, still has its idea of the human, which gives it its form, organization, and capacity for life. It is thanks to this idea that a human is a human, and not just a collection of cells. All of nature, its cyclical patterns, its laws, its beauty, all of this is a reflection of the inner order of the world of ideas. The changing of the seasons, the movement of the planets, the functioning of living organisms, all of this testifies to the deep, immanent, though mediated presence of the ideas that govern these processes. Plato believed that the universe was created by a demiurge, a divine craftsman, who, looking upon the perfect models in the world of ideas, shaped formless matter, giving it order and structure. The demiurge did not create the ideas, they already existed. He only embodied them in the material world, like a sculptor who embodies an idea in stone. This once again emphasizes the primacy and perfection of the world of ideas as the foundation for all that is. He is like an architect who builds a house, guided by the ideal plan that exists in his mind. Thus, the world of ideas is the source of the universal laws, principles, and structures that govern our world. It is not just a collection of separate ideal forms. It is a coherent, interconnected system that gives the universe its integrity and its harmony. Everything is ordered. Everything has its place and its purpose. When we come to know these ideas, we do not just acquire knowledge. We understand the deep order of the universe, its inner logic, its divine structure. This knowing brings a profound feeling of peace and confidence, for it shows that behind all visible chaos, There exist eternal, unchanging principles that hold everything in harmony. For a human being, this means that the striving for order, for beauty, for justice, is not just a cultural or social invention, but a reflection of the deep structure of being, our inner sense of harmony, our yearning for the ideal. This is an echo of how the world of ideas is organized. By knowing the ideas, we not only expand our knowledge, but also align our own souls with the cosmic order, achieving inner harmony. This is a path to a life filled with meaning, where every act can be oriented toward the higher, eternal ideas, making the world around us more orderly and beautiful. In this understanding of the ideas as the foundation of order and harmony lies the true wisdom of Plato, which continues to inspire humanity in its search for truth and perfection. After we have grasped that the world of ideas serves as the foundation for all order and harmony in the universe, we can now turn to another fascinating aspect of Plato's philosophy, his view on. For him, the art that we see in our world is not simply a reflection of reality, but rather a reflection of reflections, which places it on a lower level in the hierarchy of being and truth. Imagine that there is an idea of a bed, the perfect, eternal, unchanging archetype of a bed that exists in the world of ideas. This bed, as we already know, is the cause and model for all other beds. Then there is the bed made by a carpenter. This is the material bed that we see in our world. It is a copy or a reflection of the idea of the bed. This bed may be comfortable or uncomfortable, sturdy or fragile, but it exists by emulating its idea. And now, imagine an artist who paints a picture of this bed. This painting is merely an image of the carpenter's bed. Therefore, the painting of the bed is a reflection of a reflection. It is 3 steps removed from true being. The idea of the bed, true being, truth. The physical bed, a copy of the idea, a reflection. The image of the bed in art, a copy of the copy, a reflection of a reflection. This position of Plato's regarding art is quite severe, and he often expresses skepticism about its cognitive value. He believed that art, especially mimesis or imitation, such as painting or sculpture, leads a person away from the truth rather than bringing them closer to it. Here is why. First, art imitates the world of phenomena, not the ideas. An artist paints what they see in the sensory world, a specific tree, a particular person, a certain chair. But these specific things, as we already know, are themselves only imperfect copies of the eternal ideas. Thus, art is merely an imitation of an imitation. It does not lead us to true reality. It, in essence, strengthens our fascination with the cave, showing us even more shadows instead of leading us out into the light. For example, a sculptor who carves a human body imitates not the idea of the human, but a specific human body, which is itself already only an echo of the idea. Second, art appeals to the emotions, not to reason. Plato believed that true knowing occurs through reason, by means of rational thought and dialectic. Art, on the contrary, often evokes strong emotions, admiration, pity, fear, joy. Although emotions themselves are not bad, Plato considered that they could interfere with reason, clouding its ability for objective knowing. They can distract the soul from its search for truth, immersing it in subjective experiences. For example, a tragedy, by evoking powerful emotions, can distort the understanding of moral principles instead of contributing to their pure apprehension. Third, art can create illusions. An artist, in attempting to reproduce reality, can create impressions that seem real but in fact are not. They can imitate the appearance of things without understanding their essence. This makes art a source of deception, that leads us astray from the path of true knowing. Imagine a magician who masterfully imitates reality, but whose goal is to deceive, not to enlighten. Plato did not, however, reject all art completely. He recognized the importance of music and poetry for education, but only those forms that promote harmony and order, that cultivate virtue and lead the soul toward the knowing of the good. For example, music that has the correct rhythm and harmony can help the soul to become orderly and to approach the cosmic harmony of the ideas. He also permitted the use of art in society if it served an educational purpose and was subordinated to moral principles rather than simply entertaining or arousing strong, uncontrolled emotions. He also valued architecture and crafts, as they create functional objects that are a more direct copy of the ideas than artistic images are. A carpenter who makes a bed, though creating a copy, creates a copy that can be used. It has a certain function that is related to the idea. An artist, however, creates only an image, which has no practical function and does not lead to the essence. Thus, for Plato, art, especially imitative art, is secondary in relation to the truth. It is a reflection of reflections that leads us away from the true reality of the ideas. Its value is limited and its use must be carefully controlled so that it does not distort the mind or hinder the soul striving for higher knowledge. This does not mean that Plato was absolutely against art, but his view was rooted in his metaphysics, where priority was given to reason and the apprehension of the eternal perfect idea. His position prompts us to reflect on the true purpose of art. Should it merely entertain, or can it also be a path to a deeper understanding of the truth? We have come to the end of our deep immersion into the world of Plato, which has gradually unveiled for us the secrets of his ideas, the echoes of which resound through the millennia. After exploring his vision of art as a reflections, we can now gather all the threads of our reflection into a single whole to appreciate the enduring relevance and profound influence of Platonic philosophy on the modern world and on our understanding of being. The ideas of Plato, though formulated in ancient Greece, continue to be a living source of inspiration, critique, and deep contemplation, penetrating the most diverse spheres of human knowledge and experience. Imagine an ancient, mighty tree whose roots run deep into the earth and whose branches reach for the sky. Its fruits have nourished countless generations, and its shade has offered peace to many travelers. Platonic philosophy is such a tree. Its roots delve into the depths of metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology, while its branches extend into all aspects of human thought, from religion and art to science and politics. Even today, when we use words like ideal, perfect, platonic love, or utopia, we are unconsciously invoking his legacy, influence on religion and spirituality. Plato's concept of a higher, unchanging world of ideas, which is the source of all that exists, had an immense influence on the development of monotheistic religions, particularly Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The idea of the good as the highest principle and source of being was readily interpreted as God, the creator of the universe. The belief in an immortal soul that existed before birth and strives to return to a higher reality also found its reflection in many spiritual traditions. The metaphysical depth of Plato provided a language for describing divine perfection and divine creation. It is as if he created a universal alphabet that was later used to write sacred texts. Influence on science and mathematics. Although Plato valued reason above sensory experience, his philosophy does not contradict scientific inquiry, but on the contrary, gives it a profound meaning. The idea that behind the visible world of phenomena lie unchanging, universal laws is fundamental to modern science. Mathematics, with its perfect and immutable truths, like the idea of a circle or a triangle, was for Plato a clear example of the knowing of the idea. It is the instrument that allows us to comprehend the hidden structure of the cosmos. Modern physicists searching for a unified theory of everything, or mathematicians discovering new, previously unknown yet eternal truths, or unconsciously following the path shown by Plato. They are searching for the very same eternal ideas that underlie natural phenomena. When a scientist formulates a law, they are, in essence, attempting to grasp one of the ideas that governs the world. Influence on ethics and politics. Plato's ideas of the good and of justice are unchanging guideposts for a moral life and a just society. His search for an ideal state, governed by philosopher kings though utopian, continues to inspire reflection on how to build a better society based on reason and truth. The concept that true justice and goodness exist objectively and are not merely the result of a social contract or subjective choice is a powerful argument against moral relativism. Plato calls us to responsibility, to the aspiration to embody the higher ideas in our daily lives and in our social organization. He did not just describe the world, he gave us tools for its improvement, influence on art and aesthetics. Although Plato had a critical attitude toward imitative art, his concept of the idea of beauty had an enormous influence on Western aesthetic. Many artists and art theorists believed that true beauty lies not just in external form, but in the reflection of deep, universal ideas. The striving for ideal form, for harmony, for perfection in art, is a direct echo of Plato's idea of beauty. Even today, when we admire a brilliant painting or a piece of music, we unconsciously feel how they touch upon something greater than mere aesthetic pleasure. They touch upon the echoes of eternal beauty. Challenges and criticism. Of course, Platonic philosophy is not without its flaws and has been subject to criticism over the centuries. Aristotle, Plato's own student, criticized him for separating the ideas from material. Modern philosophy often rejects the existence of an objective world of ideas, focusing instead on subjective experience or linguistic construct. However, even the criticism of Plato is a testament to his significance, for to critique him, one must first understand his profound ideas, and it is through this very critique that philosophical thought continues to evolve. His ideas serve as a starting point for many subsequent reflections, a kind of lighthouse by which other philosophers navigate. Relevance for the modern world, in a world overflowing with information, where truth often seems relative and values subjective. Plato's doctrine of the ideas offers us a stable anchor. It reminds us that behind all the transience and chaos of the external world, there exist eternal, unchanging truths toward which we can strive. It calls us to deep reflection, to the search for meaning, to moving beyond superficial impressions. Plato does not just invite us to an intellectual exercise, he invites us to transform ourselves to a life oriented toward the knowing of the higher ideas, which are the source of true happiness, wisdom, and harmony. His philosophy is an eternal call to reflection, to self knowledge, to the search for the fundamental principles that govern being. It urges us not to be content with the visible, but to seek the hidden, not to stop at the shadows, but to strive for the light. In this eternal legacy of Plato, in these echoes of his ideas, we find a source for continuous self improvement, for building a better world, and for a deeper understanding of our own place in the great harmonious cosmos. His legacy is not just a set of outdated doctrines, but a living, breathing philosophy that continues to speak to anyone who is willing to listen to its quiet yet powerful voice. Are we ready to heed this voice and allow it to guide us through the labyrinth of the modern world toward eternal wisdom?